They thought I was the frail grandmother to be tucked away behind a bingo schedule, a signature they could coax out with a gentle threat and a forged smile. But the morning I walked into that courtroom, the man in the black robe looked up, went still, and whispered into the hush, "It's her." For a heartbeat the room held its breath. Dave's lips flattened. Dawn's eyes fell to the floor, and the story they told about me, helpless, confused, disposable, began to collapse under the weight of who I truly was. My name is Maeve. I am 69 years old. I used to believe a quiet life, faithfully lived, would protect you in old age. That belief died the day my daughter came to help me pack. Ordinary rituals, extraordinary fault line. Every morning began the same. 5:57 a.m. The kettle hissed. 6:01. The coffee bled into my chipped white mug. 6:05. I watered the African violets that my late husband, Thomas, used to talk to like old friends. Those violets were stubborn. They leaned toward light and refused to bloom unless spoken to softly. So I did. I told them about how the dawn looked like wet pewter, and about the squirrel that had started stealing from the bird feeder, and about the ache that had moved into the house when Thomas left. There is a comfort in ritual until ritual becomes a cliff's edge, and you realize you've been shuffling toward it for months. I raised one child, the sun and center of my life, my daughter. Dawn, night shifts with ammonia and lemon oil under my nails, weekend cupcake boxes tied with red bakery twine, hem after hem under the lamps, steady glow. I traded sleep for the future she deserved. I wanted her to have rooms with clean edges and doors that opened because she knocked and not because she pushed. When she married Dave, a man whose compliments always arrived with invisible invoices, I set the table for them every Sunday, held my tongue when his sarcasm cut thin slits in the air, and told myself love could outlast a draft. After Thomas's funeral, I thought grief would braid Dawn and me closer. Instead, my calls slipped to voicemail, then to nothing. Her embraces turned to hallway glances, and our house became a bargaining chip in a conversation I didn't know we were having. The Thursday of the chicken and dumplings, the humiliation didn't announce itself. It arrived on a gray Thursday, the kind of day that smells like wet wool. I made Dawn's favorite chicken and dumplings, the broth carrying every remembered winter afternoon. I put out the embroidered tablecloth I stitched when she turned. 16 tiny blue forget-me-nots, marching along the edge, set fresh daisies in a mason jar. They arrived, in a rush of cold air and entitlement. Dave dropped into Thomas's armchair with the imperial sigh of a man testing property he plans to gut. Dawn wore a bright green dress I once bought her, in a moment of motherly weakness and pride. She didn't touch the fabric with her eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, voice firm, eyes already somewhere else. Decisions, declarations, a printed brochure with smiling grandparents beside an artificial pond. A retirement community with monitored meals and managed afternoons. "You can't maintain this place," Dawn said, as if the house had ever maintained itself. "We need a bigger place. For when we have kids." Something under my ribs rattled. "This is our home," I said carefully. "Every corner has a memory." "Memories are in the heart," she replied, and the temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Dave's fake gentle voice arrived last, oily and self-certified. "We'll handle the paperwork. Don't worry." I didn't cry. I stared down at my hands, at the pale flower moons along my knuckles, and said I needed time. Dawn mistook mercy for surrender. "They're coming to appraise the house next week," she said, rising. Then they left the table, the way you leave a waiting room, quickly and without thanks. The appraisal parade next week arrived like a dental drill. A man in a gray suit performed a brisk autopsy on my living room. "Pipes are old," he said, flicking his pen. "Tiles are dated." His sentences clipped the air like cuticle scissors. Dawn trailed him, nodding, murmuring, colluding with the professional erasure of the life we had in these rooms. Dave measured spaces with his eyes. He never considered I was measuring him with mine. The brochures Dawn brought later were shiny and heavy, thick with the lie that institutional kindness replaces the kind that knows which side of the bed you prefer. She sold me leisure as if it were relief. She recommended bingo, as if my hands, these hands that built her future, needed numbered distraction more than familiar work. Then came the transfer papers. Not a Salem inheritance expedited by coercion. A lawyer with a pocket-square voice said property, transfer, best interest, while Dave tested his temper along the room's edges. When I refused to sign, they moved to Plan B. Mental incapacity proceeding. The word incompetent floated above my dining table like a cruel party balloon. Night fell. I sat in Thomas's armchair. If sorrow is an ocean, its darkest point is the silence after your dignity is questioned. In your own kitchen, the folder with the small luck every woman has a day when she either swallows humiliation or picks the lock. I chose the lock. In Thomas's desk's second drawer, beneath a stack of old utility bills, was a folder with a small brass lock and his initials pressed into the corner. I knew my husband kept habits the way soldiers keep packs, sorted, cautious, prepared. I didn't know he also kept a secret. The key waited innocently in an old book about compounding interest, exactly where a man like Thomas would hide a second future. Inside, title deeds, share certificates, rental ledgers, bank statements, and a will, updated 6 months before he died. Its language was clinical, then unexpectedly tender. The legal text established what the heart would confirm. I was the sole heir. Dawn received a conditional bequest if she honored me with care and respect. The rest was unambiguous. Properties purchased when prices slumped and everyone else looked away. A surprisingly large stake in the company where Dave worked. A piece of land on the city's edge, now worth more than the neighborhood maps could guess. And one more shock. The entire building where Dawn and Dave lived belonged to Thomas and, now to me. Their rent, like rain into a cistern, had been flowing to an account I did not know I owned. At the end, a letter. Thomas's handwriting, patient and angled, walked across the page. My dearest Maeve, if you are reading this, I'm gone, and the surprise is in your hands. I wanted your golden years to be free of counting pennies and stretching meals. Forgive me for keeping it quiet. I feared the wrong ears would overhear. I never trusted Dave. If Dawn honors you, care for her. If she turns away, protect yourself and teach her by standing firm. Use what I left you not to hurt, but to shield and to guide. I pressed the paper to my chest. Grief washed in, then resolve. They had tried to make me powerless. The truth sat in my lap like armor. The Monday of the movers when the movers arrived. Their boots thudded on the porch like drum. I sat in my armchair, a calm woman with a cup of tea and a war to win. The movers are waiting, Dawn said, glancing from her phone to the staircase. They can go, I said. Dave's smile turned into a blade. He mistook past patience for permanent permission. You have no choice, he said. I stood, crossed to the desk, and laid down a deed like a trump card. Did you know, I asked conversationally, that your apartment has never once been paid to the owner? Because the owner was my husband, and now it's me. Silence. Dawn took the document in both hands. You could see the moment her fingers felt the texture of paper that cannot lie. Dave snatched it, scanning for loopholes that didn't exist. The room exhaled when he found none. How could you hide this? Dawn asked, voice thin. I didn't, I said. I only learned 3 days ago. Your father kept it quiet to protect me. He knew we might someday need quiet wealth more than loud sympathy. Dave paced, calculating exits, threats, leverage. He found only consequences. If this is true, he said, you could evict us. I could, I said, and I will if necessary. The law allows 30 days. Consider this day 1. The movers hovered at the doorway, confused instruments in someone else's symphony. Take nothing, I told them politely. There's been a change of plan. They left with apologies and empty trucks. Dawn tried shame, then tears, then confession. It was Dave's idea. I was scared. You forgot the stove last week. I did not, I said, voice level. You handed me a fiction and tried to make me live inside it. Dave tried repentance like a borrowed suit, poorly fitted, insincere. When that failed, he tried the ugliest tool men like him polish in private. She's pregnant. He spat it into the room like a grenade. For one stuttering second, my heart stumbled. Then I heard Thomas in the letter. Protect yourself. Teach. Congratulations, I said to my daughter, and meant it. But motherhood is not a bribe. You don't trade a child for your mother's dignity. Dave broke then, the mask slipping. He called me a manipulative old woman. It would have stung if I hadn't already seen the rotted beams beneath his charm. Dawn looked at him with new clear eyes, and I watched my daughter choose self-respect over the familiar prison of his control. It didn't fix the past, but it cracked the dam that had held her better self hostage. Descent to the lobby. Abusers returned like migraine, sudden, pounding, demanding darkness. 2 weeks later, Dave stormed the building lobby, drunk on fury and cheap whiskey, insisting he had marital rights to the air in our hallway. The manager's hands trembled over the logbook. Call the police, Dave barked. My wife is being kidnapped. I stepped into the lobby as if entering a chapel. Good afternoon, Dave, he spun, eyes bright with ruined confidence. Give me back my wife. Dawn is exactly where she wants to be, I said. Leave my property. This isn't your. I called Victoria, my lawyer, on speaker. Victoria has the kind of voice that rearranges rooms. Mrs. Williams, she said, you are the sole legal owner of the building located at. She named the address. The manager straightened. Dave's jaw worked. Anything else you'd like clarified? I asked sweetly when I hung up. Perhaps the part where trespassing has consequences. He left with promises of war. I closed the lobby door and thought of Thomas again, how he liked his coffee black. How he always fixed what could be fixed and fortified what could not. There are two kinds of power, the kind that shouts and the kind that waits at the exact hinge point of the door. The court date. Dave filed suit, parental alienation, financial manipulation, the absurd claim that I had weaponized wealth to dismantle a happy marriage. He hired a lawyer whose shoes cost a month of my old paychecks. Dawn bought a purple dress that made her look like a bruise healing. I wore the pearl earrings Thomas gave me on our 20th anniversary. Small moons that remembered everything. Courtrooms are theaters where truth and performance wrestle in tailored jackets. Dave's attorney painted me as a revenge artist, an elderly puppeteer jerking her daughter on strings tied to bank statements. He called me toxic and possessive. He pronounced manipulative the way some men pronounce witch. Victoria rose and unfolded our evidence with the surgical gentleness of a woman who knows juries have eyes. Text messages where Dave's cruelty was not metaphor but grammar. Audio recordings of threats disguised as ultimatums. Witness statements from neighbors whose walls became stethoscopes for abuse. Then, the moment that cracked through time, the judge peered over his glasses, squinted, and said my name as if speaking to a ghost in broad daylight. Mrs. Williams, did you work in family court 30 years ago? My heart tripped, stumbled, ran. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I was a secretary for Judge Miller. He removed his glasses. The courtroom softened at the edges. I was an intern then, he said. You taught me to number case files so they would never be lost. You brought me coffee when everyone else forgot my name. He smiled like a man remembering an unexpected kindness on a winter bus stop. Dawn touched my arm. Dave's lawyer made a noise like an unplugged microphone. Your Honor, conflict of interest, he sputtered. There's no conflict, Judge David Morales said calmly. There is a record, and it's clear. Justice, like memory, has a long fuse. When it burns, it lights exactly what it needs to dot the years you don't see, but before that. Verdict before the whisper of it's her. Before the gavel's clean syllable. There were nights you won't see in any transcript. Nights when I sat with the letter and let Thomas's words fit my spine like a brace. Mornings when Dawn, belly rising like a small promise, washed her dish without being asked. And I pretended not to notice so she could begin her redemption without the weight of my gratitude. Afternoons when I passed the door to the room she once painted yellow and now slept in again. And I stood there for a beat too long, listening for the sound of my daughter coming back to herself. Forgiveness is not surrender. It is a disciplined hope. It says, I will not sell my dignity to buy your comfort, but I will leave the porch light on if you are willing to walk home in the rain. The last Sunday, before the hearing, we ate lentil soup at the kitchen table. The violets were blooming, faces turned toward the thin winter sun. Dawn set down her spoon. Mom, what if he wins? Her voice was small. The voice of the girl who once brought home a crumpled spelling test and cried because she missed one letter in February. Truth doesn't always win quickly, I said, but it has a better memory than lies. And we brought receipts. She half laughed, half sobbed. Then she told me about the isolations, the deletions, the daily weather systems of control. How Dave replaced her opinions with his echo and called it marriage. How he hung the word family like a chandelier over every demand and insisted I was the draft. I wanted it to be true, she said, that you were the problem, that I didn't marry a man who despised the woman who raised me. Wanting is not proof, I said gently. But facing what is, that's courage. I didn't tell her that 10 times a day I argued with my own anger and lost 5 of those arguments. I didn't tell her that love, when not respected, curdles into something that stains everything it touches. I set my hand over hers. We will walk into that courtroom as 2 women who know what we know. Let the rest do what it will. The threshold in the morning of the hearing. The courthouse smelled like paper and raincoats. Security trays filled with keys, phones, and small embarrassments. We passed the metal detector and the point of no return. Dawn squeezed my fingers. Whatever happens, she whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on you. I thought of Thomas, of his quiet stubbornness, of the way he always checked the back door twice before bed. I thought of the folder with the small lock. I thought of the appraiser's pen, of Dave's sneer, of the brochures promising a cheerful erasure. I thought of the judge, who had once been a boy with ink on his cuffs. We took our seats. The clerk called the case. Dave's lawyer stood. The gallery rustled, a murmuring sea. The judge looked up. He froze. It's her. The room went still. Sometimes, the world remembers exactly what you need it to picture a lens drifting high over the courthouse ground. Rain stippled the flag, shouldering wind like a veteran. Down on the sidewalk, umbrellas nod like slow breathing. Inside, fluorescent light hums. Doors swing. Shoes whisper. Somewhere, an old wall clock ticks. And every tick is a question. Who are you really when the story is told without your permission? That morning, I learned how a room can become a compass. The north was the bench where Judge David Morales sat. The east, Dave's table, polished, predatory. The west, ours stacked with file folders, the color of bandages. And the south, a gallery holding strangers who would, for 90 minutes, become witnesses to a quiet revolution. Recognition, it's her. 2 words, not loud, but precise, like a match head struck in the dark. The whisper skated across the bench, leaped down the oak, and landed in my bones. For a breath, everything stilled. The bailiff's pen paused over his yellow pad. A woman in the second row stopped scrolling. Somewhere above us, the HVAC clicked as if it, too, were listening. I saw it then, how recognition is a bridge thrown up over a chasm you thought you'd fall through alone. The judge's eyes softened with a recollection that cut through years. The skinny intern who dropped a box of affidavits and stood red-faced as the copies fluttered like pale birds across the carpet. The middle-aged secretary who knelt with him, gathering pages, saying softly, "We all spill. What matters is how we sort." He had been the boy learning to number files so none were lost. And I had been the woman who believed mercy is a filing system as much as a feeling. Dave's attorney jolted. His chair squeaked a small animal sound. Dave masked surprise with a smirk that came off cheap in institutional lighting. Dawn's fingers laced into mine and held, not like a drowning person clutching a life preserver, but like a daughter returning to the grip she forgot, knew her pulse. "Good morning," Judge Morales said at last, voice steady, robe creasing as he leaned forward. "Counsel will proceed." The prosecution of inconvenient women. Dave's lawyer rose, a man built from custom, cufflinks gleaming like bullet points. He had the practiced warmth of a salesman whose greatest product is his own certainty. "Your Honor," he began, pacing a step, "this is a case about interference, about a mother who cannot let go, a mother who uses money as a leash." He said mother the way some people say problem to many syllables, not enough tenderness. He painted me as the architect of a marital collapse. He said I weaponized wealth, fomented alienation, manufactured crisis, a triptych of verbs meant to turn love into a crime scene, and me into the suspect. Documentary truth. For centuries, when women have chosen dignity over docility, courts of law, of public opinion, have been asked to punish them for refusing to perform gratitude while being erased. In that moment, I felt the weight of ordinary women hovering at my shoulder, the grandmother who hid bus fare in her bra, the aunt who changed the locks the day after the funeral, the neighbor who testified even though the threats kept coming. We were all there. We always are. Victoria unfolds the record. Then Victoria stood. My lawyer had a way of moving that made the air get out of her path. She set one palm on our stack of files, as if steadying a patient. "Your Honor," she said, "stories are often loud, records are quiet. Today we bring the quiet." She started with the texts, messages from Dave to Dawn that read like weather reports for a storm that always arrived on time. "You're useless. Tell your mother to stop meddling. If she doesn't sign, I'm done with you." Each line was a small bruise captured in pixels. On the screen, the bubbles glowed sterile blue. In the gallery, you could hear the rustle of people recalibrating their sympathies. Then the recordings. Dave didn't know that the ugliest men are their most honest when they think their voice travels only as far as the kitchen tile. The audio hissed, then clarified, his tone clipped and cold, his words legal in their threat, illegal in their intent. "Declare her incompetent. She can't live alone. If you love me, you'll do it." We watched his manipulation turn into evidence against itself. Witness statements followed a neighbor from across the hall, a postal carrier who had watched me carry groceries up 3 flights and ask for help from no one, the building manager with records showing Dave's outbursts, logged like weather anomalies. Each affidavit was a rivet in a bridge we were building from suspicion to certainty. Finally, deeds and ledgers. The camera in my mind zoomed to the signatures, the way Thomas had looped the T in his name, a small flourish on a life that otherwise avoided spectacle. Property titles aligned like soldiers, share certificates whispered a fluent language of commas, bank statements scrolled columns of numbers that, to my old eyes, looked like a kind of mercy translated into math. Victoria didn't grandstand. She let the paper speak. Dave shifted in his seat, a man discovering that the trap he baited now closes politely around his ankle. Testimony, Mrs. Williams, Victoria said, turning. Tell the court about the Thursday with the chicken and dumplings. I stood. The wood of the witness stand was smooth, polished by hands braced against it in fear and hope. I cooked, I said, and the courtroom filled with the smell only memory provides. I set the tablecloth with the forget. They told me I was moving. They handed me brochures. They said I'd be safer with people my age. I could feel my voice steadying as I named each detail, as if inventory were an antidote to erasure. And how did they respond when you refused to sign? They brought a lawyer. They brought an appraiser. They brought a lie that tried to put on my face. And when you opened the folder with the lock, I told them about the key tucked in a chapter on compounded interest, a metaphor too tender for a court transcript. I told them about the will, the properties, the building, the shares, the string of decisions Thomas had made in silence so my voice could someday be heard. And the letter, Victoria asked. I didn't read it. I told them what it had done. It reminded me that protection isn't vengeance. It told me to teach if I could. Teach that dignity is a boundary you guard without apology. And that love, without respect, is just a softer name for control. When I finished, the gallery had settled into a hush that wasn't silence so much as attention. Dawn's turn. She stood like a woman stepping out of a house she lived in too long. I believed him, she said, eyes on her hands, because it was easier than admitting I didn't believe in myself. She spoke of the isolation that arrived disguised as care, the budget spreadsheets she never saw, the way his voice colonized her inner monologue until every thought began with his approval. I hurt my mother. I am not asking for pity. I am asking to be allowed to repair what I broke. Dave's attorney pounced, then sour charm turning to acid. Miss Foster, he said, isn't it true your mother has recently come into money? He rolled the word money around his mouth like a lozenge. And isn't it also true that your testimony today protects your access to that money? Dawn lifted her chin. No, I knew the truth before I knew the accounts. My mother's dignity isn't an asset, it's a fact. He smirked. And the recordings were they obtained with your husband's consent? His threats didn't ask for mine. He tried more dates and insinuations, the small black magic of cross-examination. But Dawn had learned a new grammar. She conjugated courage in the present tense. Then Dave took the stand. The mask slips. He straightened his tie 3 times before speaking. I'm a provider, he began, the way a man might recite a resume to a mirror. I wanted what was best. Mrs. Williams was confused. He flinched on the verb, as if the court might allow him to move me off stage with one grammatical shove. Victoria approached with a folder, her expression physician. Mr. Foster, did you text your wife? And I quote, make her sign, or I walk. Dave blinked, taken out of context. Play Exhibit B, Victoria said. The courtroom filled with his voice, insisting that family meant obedience, that love meant obedience, that everything he wanted meant obedience. Context, it turned out, was not his ally. Mr. Foster, she continued. Is it your testimony that you did not threaten to file a mental incompetency petition? I suggested evaluation. For the record, Victoria said to the judge, the difference between evaluation and declaration is not semantic when done in bad faith. She walked him through each message, each late-night voicemail, each neighbor's sworn notice of shouting behind a door that locked from the inside. She asked simple questions. He answered with complicated sentences that circled the truth, but never touched it. The jury of public listening, the gallery lined away. Finally, she set a copy of the deed to our building on the ledge of the witness box. Do you recognize this document? He glanced at it the way a man might glance at a snake. No, that will be all. The intermission of memory while lawyers conferred, while the judge scribbled notes in an elegant, old-fashioned hand. My mind wandered to the file room where we once worked. me dictating cover letters into a cassette recorder that clicked loud at the end of every sentence. David then, just David, labeling folders with meticulous care. In those days we handled the paper trail of lives, restraining orders printed on paper the color of dental paste, petitions for custody, with margins full of coffee rings, guardian ad litem, reports worded with grief-proof restraint. We learned that justice isn't just a verdict, it's a habit built from thousands of small clerical mercies that keep the right names attached to the right truths. If I was the woman I am because of anything, it was because ordinary days taught me how to file what mattered where it could be found when needed. Thomas's letter was filed where my heart could find it. My daughter's apology filed under beginnings, not insufficient. My own anger filed under kept on a leash, for use only when necessary. Rulings and Rivers Counsel. Judge Morales said finally, I've reviewed the pleadings, exhibits, and testimony. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench. I watched the grooves on either side of his nose ease. Mr. Foster's petition alleges parental alienation and financial manipulation. The court finds no credible evidence of alienation. It finds ample evidence of coercive control by Mr. Foster. He turned a page. As to finances, assets lawfully inherited are not instruments of abuse when used to establish boundaries and ensure safety. A parent's dignity is not an economic tort. Dave's lawyer, huffed, then thought better of it. Pending final judgment, the judge continued, this court issues a temporary protective order in favor of Miss Foster and Mrs. Williams, prohibits contact except through counsel, and denies Mr. Foster's request for interim custody. The matter of custody will be addressed with the benefit of a guardian ad litem report and a parenting assessment conducted by a clinician the court will appoint. You could feel the room decide. A collective, quiet yes. He looked toward me, and for a heartbeat the robe dropped away, and I saw the intern returning a stapler with two hands because he had been taught to respect other people's tools. Mrs. Williams, he said, you once told me that the law is a map and a flashlight. Thank you for carrying both when others lost their way. The gavel tapped, not thunderous, but firm, like a respectful knock on a door that would now open to a different corridor. The hallway outside. The hallway smelled of old carpet and new rain. Dawn exhaled a sound that was half laughter, half collapsed. He didn't get custody, she said, hand on her belly, as if this outcome had fist-bumped our unborn. He didn't get me, she added softer. A sentence contracted into a vow. Victoria squeezed my shoulder. This is a beginning, not an ending. He'll bluster. He might appeal. We'll be ready. Dave passed with his attorney. His face had the color of old newsprint gray smudged, already yesterday. This isn't over, he said. The reliable last line of men who can't imagine a universe where consequence is not a rumor. No, I agreed. It's not. The elevator doors parted with a metallic sigh. Inside, a toddler in a red coat asked his mother why the ceiling had lines. So it doesn't fall, she said, kissing the crown of his head. I looked up. Lines, grids, structure. We make things steady so the ones we love can walk beneath them without fear. Thomas had built steel beams I couldn't see until the roof was tested. The letter revisited that night. Back at the kitchen table, I unfolded the letter again. The paper had softened at the creases, a map handled often. Thomas's script sloped like a man hurrying to finish a kindness before the light fades. Use this power wisely, my love, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. I wrote in the margin, pencil light. Today I protected. Tomorrow I teach, because victories rot into vanity if they don't replant themselves as service. Dawn came in, hair damp from the rain. I made tea, she said, and she had 2 mugs. My chipped white one, and the blue speckled one we bought at a church bazaar when she was 10. She set the blue one in front of me, then swapped it without a word, giving me the chipped white. Small restitution. Not everything can be repaired with ceremony. Sometimes it's the mug. I'm sorry, she said again, but quieter now, not demanding absolution, offering acknowledgement. I know, I said. Keep being sorry in useful ways. She nodded, a student who has finally understood the assignment, the work of repairing the weeks that followed. Our house changed temperature. Dawn rose early, and I heard the domestic percussion of apology, the soft clatter of dishes washed without being asked, the rhythmic whisk of a broom across the threshold, the careful way she handled the frames that once held our photos. She put new backing on the picture of Thomas holding her on the day we brought her home from the hospital. She rehung it, this time slightly lower, as if to admit we all need to be able to touch some memories with our fingertips. I watched, and I did not rush to narrate it as redemption. Redemption isn't a montage. It's a shift in weather patterns, proven by seasons, not afternoons. We met with a counselor, a woman with sensible shoes and sensibler metaphors, who explained coercive control like a diagram in a manual, isolation, gaslighting, micromanagement, financial imprisonment. Dawn took notes while I took breath. The therapist asked me to list boundaries. I surprised myself with how easily they arrived. No unannounced visits by Dave. No conversations without a third party. No financial entanglements without legal review. No apologies that begin with "but." In the afternoons, I walked the block. The jacaranda near the corner began to purple. The dogs learned I was the lady with secret biscuits. 2 doors down, Mrs. Alvarez taught me how to pinch basil to make it bushy. Life resumed its domestic rituals, but now they were not a cliff, more like a path edged with the flowers Thomas loved. The past calls a week before the next hearing. The phone rang with a number I recognized from another life. Maeve, a voice asked, tobacco scratched. Warm. It's Millie, from the old courthouse. I hadn't heard her name in years. We had once shared a desk calendar and a stash of emergency chocolate. Millie, I saw your case on the docket, she said. I volunteered with the Retired Clerks Association. I thought if you needed anything. What I needed was not a file pulled or a form stamped. What I needed was a witness to the version of me that was never fragile. Tell me I wasn't imagining it, I said, that we mattered. You held that place together, she said simply. You taught the interns where the light switches were. You taught the lawyers how to say please. You taught me that kindness counts twice when nobody is watching. When we hung up, I stood by the violets and let a tear find me without shame. The past wasn't a ghost. It was a scaffolding. And I had finally climbed high enough to see it. The cliff at the edge of Mercy. We could end here with a gavel, with a hallway, with tea, with violets. But this is a documentary, not a fairy tale. And documentaries know that after the first victory comes the long work. The GAL's home visit, Dave's appeal filed in a font that tried too hard, the whispering campaign among his friends that I was manipulative, controlling, rich in all the wrong ways. There were days when the urge to punish flickered like a pilot light. Call his boss, the anger said, and not just to warn. But I kept Thomas's sentence taped inside the cupboard door, where I reached for sugar each morning, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Protection meant we installed a security camera and changed our routines. Without changing our address, it meant Dawn opened a new bank account in her own name and learned the strange pleasure of reconciling a statement that belonged only to her. It meant I gave my attorney durable power of annoyance over any letter that arrived with Dave's lawyer's return address. Teaching that would come, I realized, not with lectures, but with a model. Houses shelter, gardens flourish, and sometimes daughters grow up on the second try. We would be the less invisible, mundane, persistent. The judge calls chambers 2 months after that first day in court. A notice arrived. Status conference in chambers. These are quieter, more candid rooms. No gallery, no performance, just oak, books, and a judge who remembers when you kept his coffee warm while he sprinted a filing deadline. We sat across from him, Victoria to my left, Dawn to my right, Dave on the opposite side, his new lawyer, younger, hungrier, wearing a tie the red of overripe fruit. Mr. Forster, the judge said, I have reviewed your appeal. You've alleged bias because of my prior acquaintance with Mrs. Williams. Let the record reflect. 30 years ago, she was a clerk in a courthouse where I was an intern. She once taught me to double-clip exhibits so they wouldn't slide in transit. If that is bias, it is a bias for order. He paused. Do you prefer chaos? Dave attempted a smile. It wilted. The judge turned to us. Ms. Foster, he said to Dawn, your GAL report is favorable. Keep your therapy appointments. Keep your bank accounts separate. Keep your temper. You're doing well. He looked at me last. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened. Mrs. Williams, the letter your husband wrote Victoria provided a copy for chambers, not for the file. I read it. May I say, he was a wise man. Stubborn, I said softly. That too, the judge smiled. The court's final custody order will reflect what has been obvious since day one. Safety and stability are the best interests of the child. He didn't say the child's name. The child hadn't been born, but already, she had a future, lighter by a few stones. Closing image that evening. Rain again. I stood on the porch while the streetlights haloed puddles, and somewhere a radio played an old soul song too. quietly to catch the words. Dawn stepped out, wrapped in a sweater of mine she once called too itchy. She slipped her arm through mine. We didn't speak. We listened to rain practicing its patient argument. Every drop a small insistence that erosion works wonders given time. Inside, the letter waited in its folder. The violets leaned imperceptibly toward the sound of water. The house, still mine, still ours, breathed like a creature asleep and safe. A story, properly told, doesn't end with applause. It ends with a door quietly latched, a kettle beginning to hum, a woman learning the strength in the soft click of a lock. She turns herself, a house lit by early morning, the hour when silence holds its breath before the day begins. Sunlight seeps through the lace curtains, painting gentle patterns across the table where two mugs sit, one chipped white, one blue speckled. Steam curls upward, slow and steady. Outside, the garden hums, softly the violets, always first to greet the light, lean toward the window like small witnesses to a miracle still unfolding. This is what healing sounds like. Not applause, not music, just the creak of a chair, the clink of a spoon, and the long exhale of a woman who survived being erased. The weight of piss in the weeks after the hearing. The house felt too quiet. For so long, silence had been my enemy, proof that I was alone, that laughter had fled these walls. Now, it was different. The silence felt earned. Peace, I realized, has a weight. It doesn't float. It settles gently over your shoulders like a shawl woven from patience and scars. Dawn moved back into her old room, the one painted a soft yellow. I had never changed it after she left. Some part of me always knew she'd need to find her way back. The bedspread, the photographs, even the tiny crack near the window where she once taped her secret notes, all of it waited quietly, like time paused in a drawer. She filled the room again with motion, unpacking clothes, folding laundry, muttering to herself as she arranged her things. But there was caution in her steps, like someone learning to walk again after forgetting how. Every morning she asked, "Can I make breakfast, Mom?" And every morning I said, "Yes, you can," even though she burned the toast half the time. These were small offerings, humble gestures, like apologies that didn't need words. Slowly, painfully, we began to learn each other again, not as mother and child, but as two women carrying the same history in different ways. The unseen battles. Dawn's pregnancy advanced quietly, her belly rounding beneath the same sweaters she used to wear as a teenager. Some mornings, I'd find her in the living room, hand on her stomach, whispering to the child as if narrating the world she hoped to build. But the past doesn't fade because you wish it to. Dave lingered like an echo, phone calls from unknown numbers, envelopes without return addresses, short messages meant to unsettle. "You can't hide her from me. You'll regret this." They were printed threats, but they couldn't reach inside these walls. I turned every one of them over to Victoria, my lawyer, who handled them with surgical calm. "He's grasping at ghosts," she said, "and ghosts don't win cases." Still, at night, I'd wake to faint noises, branches brushing the windows, the fridge humming, and feel that old tremor of fear. I'd reach for Thomas's letter in the drawer beside my bed. The paper had softened from my fingertips, the ink faint at the edges, but the words were still sharp, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. That line became my armor. Each time I read it, the tremor quieted. The visit from social services. 2 months later, a woman from family services arrived, a social worker named Clara, with tired eyes and a clipboard hugged to her chest. Her job was to assess Dawn's home environment before finalizing custody. "I just need to observe," she said gently. "Routine things, safety, emotional stability, support systems." "Of course," I replied, smiling. "Would you like some tea? Or a muffin? My daughter's still learning how not to burn them." Clara smiled, grateful for the warmth. She toured the house, ticking boxes, clean kitchen, safe furniture, no hazards. Then she paused by the window, looking at the violets. "These are beautiful," she said. "They were my husband's," I told her. "They bloom when you speak kindly to them." She wrote something on her clipboard, probably responds with humor or emotionally stable. But I saw something in her eyes. Recognition. Maybe she, too, had seen families unravel and restitch themselves thread by thread. When she left, she said, "You've built something rare here, safety that feels like home." It wasn't a line for her report. It was a small truth. Dawn's letter. One evening, I found an envelope on my nightstand. Inside was a handwritten letter, Dawn's handwriting, round and deliberate, like it used to be in her school notes. "Mom, I know words can't undo what I did, but I need to put them somewhere real. You once told me that love without respect isn't love, it's dependency wearing perfume. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I became someone you wouldn't recognize because I stopped recognizing myself. Dave didn't take that from me, gave it away piece by piece. I thought I was building a marriage, but I was just dismantling my voice. Thank you for fighting for me, even when I didn't deserve it. I promise you, my child will grow up knowing what real strength looks like because she'll grow up knowing you. Love. Don't I folded the letter and placed it next to Thomas's. His had taught me how to survive. Hers reminded me why. The birth of Serenity, the day Dawn went into labor, the sky cracked open with rain. It was the kind of downpour that blurs the world into watercolor. We rushed to the hospital, Dawn gripping my hand, gasping through contractions. Between breaths, she whispered, "Mom, promise me you won't leave the room." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and meant it. Hours passed hours, where pain and hope braided together into something holy. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, it sounded like sunlight after months of gray. Serenity. That's what Dawn named her. When I held her for the first time, I felt the full circle of my life closing softly. Everything I had lost, everything I had fought for, now wrapped in one fragile, perfect heartbeat. "She has your stubborn expression," I told Dawn. "She has your eyes," Dawn replied, smiling through exhaustion. And just like that, forgiveness began, not in grand speeches or tears, but in the quiet rhythm of a newborn's breath, reclaiming purpose after Serenity's birth. I found myself restless. Peace, though beautiful, can turn heavy if it doesn't move. I remembered what Thomas had written. Use this power wisely. Teach. So I began volunteering at the local community center once a week at first, then twice. I helped elderly women fill out legal aid forms, taught them how to secure their properties, how to recognize manipulation wrapped in kindness. I told them, the world will treat you as fragile, but remember, glass cuts, too. Word spread. Soon, I was asked to speak at small gatherings, then at women's shelters. I told my story not as tragedy, but as proof that dignity can outlive betrayal. Every time I finished, someone would approach me with tears in her eyes and whisper, "That happened to me too." And I'd tell her what I had learned. You can be broken and still be the one who builds. That's how the foundation began. Home and Dignity, a safe space for elderly women cast aside by family or circumstance. We found them beds, meals, therapy, and most importantly, I invested a portion of Thomas's estate, and soon, donations followed. It wasn't charity, it was reclamation. Dave's shadow for nearly a year. We heard nothing from Dave. Then one morning, a thin envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single line: "You won't always be there to protect her." No signature, no proof, just poison on paper. I handed it to Victoria. "He's bluffing," she said, shredding it with steady hands. "Men like him survive on the echo of fear." Starve the echo. I didn't reply. I just looked at the window where Serenity's laughter floated in from the garden. Dave's words didn't scare me anymore. They simply reminded me of the distance I'd traveled. Fear used to be my cage. Now, it was just noise outside the walls I'd built. An unexpected invitation a year later. A formal letter arrived, this one sealed with gold trim. It was from Judge Morales. "Mrs. Williams, the Retired Judges Association would like to honor your work through Home and Dignity. Your story has inspired reforms in elder rights and financial protection laws. Please accept this as our invitation to speak at our annual conference." Asterisk. I laughed when I read it, part disbelief, part pride. Dawn insisted on helping me write the speech. "Just tell the truth," she said. "That's what saved us." So I did. I wrote about how injustice doesn't always wear a villain's mask, it often smiles at your dinner table. I wrote about the quiet cruelty of condescension, about how society teaches women to be polite when they should be powerful. And I ended with Thomas's words, "Not to hurt, but to protect and to teach." When I delivered the speech months later, the room fell silent in that way that feels like prayer. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was reverent. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. Dawn's transformation. Dawn bloomed in the years that followed. She went back to college, finished her degree in accounting, and joined a small firm where she managed finances for single mothers rebuilding their lives. "It feels like paying a debt," she said once, but in a good way. Every Friday, we cooked dinner together. Her new recipes, my old habits. Serenity toddled around with her toys, giggling at shadows and pretending to feed her stuffed rabbit imaginary soup. Sometimes, when I caught Dawn watching me, her eyes would glisten, not with guilt anymore, but with gratitude. And I'd smile, because this was what Thomas meant by teach. The mirror moment. One evening, I stood before the bathroom mirror brushing my hair and caught a glimpse of my reflection, the silver lines, the faint scars of time. For a long moment, I didn't recognize myself, not because I looked older, but because I looked free. I thought about the woman I had been, trembling in a kitchen full of unopened boxes, believing her story was over, and I realized she hadn't died. She had simply been waiting for me to remember her. I whispered to the mirror, "You made it." And for the first time, I believed it. The visit one afternoon, as I watered the violets, the doorbell rang. It was Judge Morales, now retired, standing with a gentle smile and a bouquet of lilies. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, "and I wanted to see the woman who taught me justice before the law ever could." I laughed. "And here I thought you'd forgotten." He shook his head. "Impossible. You reminded me why I became who I am. And your foundation, Maeve, it's saving lives." We sat on the porch, sipping tea, sharing stories of old cases and lost colleagues. He told me how my trial had changed policy, how judges now received training on elder coercion and financial abuse. "You didn't just win a case," he said. "You changed a system." When he left, I watched him walk down the path lined with violets and thought, Thomas would have been proud. Full circle. 5 years passed. Serenity grew into her name, a bright, fearless child who ran through the garden shouting, "Grandma Maeve, look, a butterfly." Her laughter was the kind that heals places inside you that grief once hollowed. Every morning, I still used the chipped white mug, not because I needed to, but because it reminded me that imperfection can hold warmth just fine. The foundation had grown 3 houses, 50 women, dozens of success stories, each one a thread woven into a tapestry of survival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Dawn joined me in the garden. "Mom," she said softly, "have you ever thought of writing your story down for others to read?" I smiled. "Who'd want to read about an old lady and her She touched my hand. "Everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet." That night, I began to write, not for fame or forgiveness, but for remembrance, because some stories aren't just lived, they're meant to light the way for others still in the dark. The story begins again on a calm morning, 5 years after the trial that changed everything. The sky is pale blue, streaked with the soft brushstrokes of dawn. The air smells of wet grass and new beginnings. On the porch of a modest but warm-looking house sits a woman with silver hair and a mug that's seen more life than most people ever will. That woman is me, Maeve Williams, 74 years old, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not surviving, I'm living the birth of home and dignity. What started as a single idea scribbled in my notebook after one restless night had become a living, breathing movement. Home and Dignity had 3 houses across the state now, each sheltering women who had been tossed aside by their own families. Some had been tricked out of their homes, others emotionally blackmailed into surrendering their independence. All of them arrived with the same look I once saw in the mirror, a mix of disbelief and quiet shame. That expression never lasted long. Not here. Each morning, the houses buzzed with gentle chaos, laughter echoing in hallways, women cooking together, one of them singing an old jazz tune, while another tried to remember the steps to a dance she'd learned decades ago. It was a kind of rebirth, the kind that doesn't come with candles or confetti, but with coffee, courage, and conversation. Dawn had become the backbone of the foundation. She handled the finances, coordinated with donors, and spoke to the women with a compassion that humbled me. She had turned her own guilt into purpose, a kind of alchemy only true redemption allows, and serenity. She had become our unofficial mascot. Everyone adored her, the little girl with a voice too big for her size, who ran through the gardens shouting, "Grandma says violets bloom when you talk to them nicely." In truth, she was right. The violets always seemed to bloom brighter when she laughed nearby. The letter that changed everything again. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the letter came. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting elegant, official but familiar. The seal read, "The Retired Judges Association." Inside, a letter from Judge Morales himself. "Dear Mrs. Williams, we are honored to inform you that your foundation, Home and Dignity, has been selected for the Justice Beyond the Bench Award. Your resilience and advocacy have led to new, protective legislation for elderly citizens. Would mean the world to us if you could attend the ceremony and share your story. With deep respect, Hon. David Morales." I read it twice, then a third time. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the strange ache that comes with being seen after years of invisibility. Dawn found me in the living room, staring at the letter. "Mom, what is it?" I handed it to her silently. She read, and her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, they want to honor you." "No," I said softly. "They're honoring everyone who was told to sit down and stayed standing instead." She smiled, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to cheer when I fixed her doll's broken arm. "You deserve this, Mom. You deserve every bit of it." Preparing to speak, public speaking had never been my strength. I could scrub floors, raise a child, or run a home, but standing in front of hundreds of people, that was another story. For weeks, I wrote drafts, pages full of crossed out lines, rewrites, and scribbled notes in the margins. Too bitter, too soft, too long, too safe. Dawn would come in every evening, reading my drafts as Serenity sat nearby coloring pictures of Super Grandma. "Just speak from the heart," Dawn said one night. "You've already lived the story. Now you just have to tell it." That night, I stayed up until the clock struck 2, writing my final draft by the warm glow of the lamp. I ended it with Thomas's words, the same words that had carried me through every dark hour, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. The ceremony took place in a grand old courthouse, its marble columns polished, its chandeliers gleaming. The same halls that once held my fear now welcomed me like an old friend. As I walked through the entrance, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. The woman looking back was older, yes, but steadier, fuller, alive with the quiet power that only comes from surviving the impossible. Judge Morales greeted me personally. His face had softened with age, but his eyes still carried that same spark of gratitude. "You changed more than laws, Mrs. Williams," he said. "You changed the way people see justice." When my name was announced, the applause felt like a heartbeat echoing through the chamber. I stood before them not as a victim, not as a grandmother, not as a charity founder, but as a woman who had fought for her name to mean something again. I began softly, almost whispering. 5 years ago, I walked into a courtroom believing my story was over. I was wrong, because sometimes, when life burns you down to ashes, that's when you realize you were meant to rise. I told them about the house, the betrayal, the folder with the small lock, the letter from my husband, and the trial that restored not just my dignity, but my voice. And then I ended with what mattered most. Power doesn't come from money or youth. It comes from knowing when to stop apologizing for existing. I didn't win my case to destroy anyone. I won it to remind others like me, you are not disposable. You are not invisible. And it's never too late to stand up for yourself. When I stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the bailiff, the same man who once escorted me through trembling, stood to applaud. The encounter after the ceremony. I stood in the lobby signing programs for women who came to thank me. That's when I saw him. Dave. He stood by the doorway, thinner than I remembered. His hair streaked with gray, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the air thickened with memories, shouting, humiliation, fear. "Mrs. Williams," he said quietly. His voice was weaker now, almost brittle. "I heard about your foundation. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I looked at him, searching his face for manipulation. There was none this time, just regret, raw and unpolished. "Do you mean it?" I asked. He nodded. "I lost everything after that trial. My job, my marriage, my reputation. I blamed you for years, but I see now that I built my own prison." I studied him a long while. "Apology doesn't erase what you did," I said gently, "but it can keep you from doing it again." He lowered his eyes. "You're right. I just wanted you to know. I've been sober for 2 years. I work at a counseling center now, for men like me." For a brief moment, I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Some lessons, I realized, echo both ways. "Good," I said quietly. "Keep teaching others what it costs to break someone's trust." He nodded once, tears gathering, then walked away without another word. I never saw him again. Serenity's promised that evening. Back home, I found Serenity waiting for me on the porch. She was 7 now, her curls wild, her face smeared with chocolate ice cream. "Grandma, Mommy said you got an award," she shouted, running into my arms. I lifted her, feeling her small heartbeat against mine. "I did, my love. But do you know what it's for?" She grinned. "For being brave." "Yes," I smiled. "For remembering who I was, even when others forgot." Serenity touched my cheek, her voice small but sure. "When I grow up, I'm gonna be brave like you. And I'm gonna have a garden too with violets." Tears pricked my eyes. You already are brave, my little one. Teaching the next generation, the following months were a blur of interviews, seminars, and new projects. Universities invited me to speak about elder advocacy. The local news aired a documentary called The House That Dignity Built. But my favorite part was the weekly story circle at the foundation's newest home. I'd sit with women, some grandmothers, some barely out of their 30s, and tell them everything I'd learned the hard way. One day, a frail woman named Esther asked, "Do you ever regret not cutting them out completely? Your daughter, your son-in-law, everyone who hurt you?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said finally, "because regret is just love that doesn't know where to go. If I'd cut Dawn off, I'd have lost the chance to see her become who she was always meant to be." Esther nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "You make it sound so easy." "It wasn't," I said. "It took losing everything to learn that forgiveness isn't a favor, it's freedom." The night of the violets, one night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the garden, where the violets glowed faintly in the moonlight. I knelt, touching their petals. They were soft, alive, and endless, just like the love Thomas had left behind. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I did it, Thomas. I used your gift. I taught her. I taught myself." The wind rustled through the leaves, and for a moment, I swear I heard his voice. "You did more than teach. You healed." Life, full circle. 5 years later, the foundation opened its fourth house, named Serenity Place. Dawn was promoted to Director of Operations, and Serenity, now a bright, confident 12-year-old, cut the ribbon with her little hands trembling from excitement. "Grandma," she said, looking up at me, "do you think I could work here one day too?" I smiled, heart swelling. "You already do, sweetheart. You remind us why we started." As the crowd clapped and cameras flashed, I felt something inside me settle, a quiet, lasting peace. The story that began with betrayal had become one of rebirth. The woman they once tried to erase had become a name spoken with reverence. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch again with my chipped mug of tea. Dawn joined me, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "do you ever miss the old days?" I smiled softly. "No, honey, the old days were lessons. These are the rewards." We sat in silence as Serenity's laughter drifted from inside. The moonlight brushed against the garden, and the violets shimmered like tiny constellations at our feet. "Do you ever think Dad can see us?" Dawn asked. "I don't just think it," I said, looking at the flowers that seemed to lean toward the sky. "I know it." A soft breeze swept through the garden, carrying the faint scent of violets, Thomas's favorite. And for a fleeting moment, I felt his hand over mine, steady, proud, eternal. "You see, Thomas," I whispered, smiling through tears, "some stories don't end, they bloom." It was early spring, again the kind that wakes the earth from its long sigh. The violets were back in bloom, each one lifting its small purple face to the morning light. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching Serenity chase a butterfly across the garden path. Her laughter carried through the open door, soft, musical, like wind chimes made of joy. I smiled. Every sound, every color, every breath of this house felt like proof that survival could be beautiful. 5 years ago, this garden had been my refuge from despair. Now, it was a sanctuary of hope for me, for my daughter, and for the dozens of women who'd walked through our doors carrying invisible wounds. Life had finally become what I once thought impossible: peaceful. But peace doesn't mean stillness. Peace, I had learned, is a living thing. It grows, changes, and sometimes asks you to keep walking even when the path ahead looks uncertain. And that spring, life was about to ask that of me again. The letter from the past envelope arrived one morning as I was sorting through donations for the foundation's new project. It was small, plain, with no return address. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar enough to freeze my breath. I sat down before opening it. Inside, on a single sheet of lined paper, were a few words. "Maeve, if you can forgive me, please come. I'm sick. I don't have anyone else. Dave." My hands trembled. My first instinct was disbelief and anger, then something harder to name. Pity, perhaps, or exhaustion. It had been nearly 8 years since I'd last seen him at the award ceremony, frail and remorseful. I thought that was the end of his chapter in my story. But apparently, not all endings stay put. I showed the letter to Dawn that evening. She read it quietly, her face unreadable. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know," I said. "But if it's true, I can't pretend he never existed. He was part of what made us who we are." Dawn nodded slowly, eyes distant. Do you want me to come with you? No, I said softly. This one's mine. The visit he lived in a hospice on the outskirts of town, a sterile white building tucked behind an old church. The nurse at the front desk led me down a narrow hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. When I stepped into his room, the years hit me all at once. Dave was thinner, his once dark hair gone silver. The arrogance that used to cling to him like cologne was gone too. What was left was a man stripped down to something human, something almost fragile. He looked up, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Maeve, he rasped, voice barely a whisper. You came. I did, I said, sitting by his bedside. You said you wanted to talk. He smiled faintly, a ghost of his old charm. You always were the only one who'd faced me straight on. I suppose that hasn't changed, I replied. He coughed, a hollow, rattling sound. Lung cancer. Too many years thinking I was invincible. I don't have much time. I nodded, not out of sympathy, but acknowledgement. Why did you call me? Because, he said, eyes wet, I needed to say it before I go. I was wrong, Maeve, about everything. I ruined my marriage, hurt Dawn, hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I can't leave without trying. Silence filled the space between us like water. For years, I had dreamed of this moment of seeing him powerless, begging for forgiveness, but now that it was here, I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. Double quotes. Do you know what forgiveness costs? I asked quietly. It's not a gift, it's labor. It takes years to rebuild what people like you burn down in minutes. He looked down, ashamed. I know. I studied his face, the wrinkles etched deep, the eyes dulled but sincere. He was no longer the man who had tried to destroy me. He was simply a man facing the end. I forgive you, I said finally, not because you deserve it, but because I do. He began to cry, then softly, like someone exhaling regret, and for the first time, I saw not my enemy, but a reflection of what unchecked pride can do to a soul. Before I left, he whispered, Tell Dawn, I'm proud she became the woman she is. Tell her I'm sorry. I nodded, turned, and walked away. The moment I stepped outside, the air hit me like baptismal, sharp, cleansing. Some ghosts, I realized, don't need to be exorcised. They just need to be released. The expansion that summer, Home and Dignity, opened its 5th refuge, the Garden, house dedicated to women recovering from emotional abuse. Dawn handled the legal side, while I focused on what I did best, listening. We had a ritual every morning. Over tea, the women shared one small truth about themselves, a story, a memory, a confession. Some spoke of betrayal, others of loss, but all spoke of the same wound, being made to feel unworthy of love. I told them my story again, stripped of drama but not of truth. I lost everything once, I said, my home, my family, my voice. But what I learned was this: dignity is not something others can take from you. It's something you decide never to give away. Each time I said those words, I could see the spark in their eyes, the first flicker of belief returning, and in those faces, I saw my younger self again. Dawn's Testoni evening. I found Dawn sitting on the porch, staring into the dusk. She looked troubled. What is it, honey? I asked. She hesitated. It's about Dave. Went to see him. My heart clenched. When, a week ago, I didn't tell you because I didn't want to upset you. He's dying, Mom. And he asked for me. I took a deep breath. And what did you say? I told him I forgave him too, she said, voice trembling. For a long time, I hated him. I hated myself for loving him. But when I saw him lying there, all I saw was a man who lost everything he ever cared about. I reached for her hand. Then, you did the right thing. She smiled weakly. You taught me that forgiveness isn't for the past, it's for the future. And in that moment, I knew she was ready to lead without me. My work, my true work, was nearly done. The loss and the lesson. A month later, we got the call. Dave had passed away quietly in his sleep. He left behind a small note, found in his bedside drawer. To Maeve and Dawn, I don't deserve peace, but I hope you both find it. Dave *. We attended a simple funeral, no crowd, no speeches, just the three of us, me, Dawn, and Serenity. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, I whispered, May your lessons outlive your mistakes. When we walked away, Serenity tugged at my sleeve. Grandma, was he a bad man? I paused, then knelt to her level. He was a man who forgot how to be good for a while, but he remembered before it was too late. She thought for a moment, then smiled. Then I'm glad we forgave him. Out of the mouths of children, truth comes easy. The unexpected award 6 months later. the foundation received international recognition. We were invited to Geneva to attend the Global Humanity Summit, where home and dignity was to be honored for its impact. I almost refused. "I'm too old for flights and cameras," I said, but Dawn insisted. "Mom, this isn't about fame. It's about showing the world that healing can be led by women who were never supposed to have power." So I went, standing on that stage, with translators murmuring in half a dozen languages and the lights warm on my face. I felt something deeper than pride purpose. I spoke for 15 minutes about resilience, compassion, and legacy. When I finished, the audience rose to their feet, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw Thomas in the crowd, smiling proudly, mouthing the words, "You did it." Passing the torch when we returned home, I gathered the staff in the main hall. "I'm stepping down," I announced. The room fell silent. Dawn looked at me, stunned. "Mom, are you sure?" "Yes," I said gently. "It's time. The foundation doesn't need me to lead anymore. It needs to grow without depending on my story." There were tears, hugs, promises. I left the role with peace, knowing Dawn was ready. She had her father's calm, and my fire, the perfect balance for leadership. That night, alone on the porch, I whispered to the stars, "Thomas, it's her turn now." The final letter a week later, as I was sorting through old files, I found an envelope tucked between pages of Thomas's notebook, my name written in his handwriting, faint but steady. "My dearest Maeve, if you're reading this, it means the journey has gone further than I could dream. I always knew you would outlive your pain, because your heart was built from something the world can't break. Faith. Remember, love isn't a cage, it's a door. Keep opening it, even when you're tired. When the time comes, don't be afraid to rest. You've already built forever. Your husband, Thomas." I pressed the letter to my chest and wept, not out of grief, but gratitude. He had believed in me long before I believed in myself, and somehow, even in death, he was still guiding me home. A garden of names. 2 years later, Home and Dignity opened its 6th house. This one was special, built entirely in memory of the women who had passed through our doors and reclaimed their lives. They called it the Garden of Names. Each violet in the courtyard represented one woman's story, each name engraved on the wall of victory. During the dedication ceremony, Dawn gave a speech. I stood beside her, Serenity holding my hand. "My mother taught me," Dawn said, voice steady, "that dignity isn't given, it's grown. And this garden is proof that no matter how deep the darkness, something beautiful can still bloom." Tears rolled down my cheeks as applause filled the air. I looked at Serenity, who smiled up at me and whispered, "Grandma, one day, I'll plant more violets." I smiled back, "You already are." Morning sunlight filters through the window, warm and forgiving. I wake to the soft chirp of birds outside and the faint sound of Serenity practicing piano in the next room. The melody is uneven, hesitant, searching, but there's beauty in its imperfection. It reminds me of life itself, a song we spend years learning, missing notes but never stopping the music. I sit up slowly, the years settling into my bones like the gentle weight of an old quilt. My hands are wrinkled, but strong, the kind of hands that have built homes, varied pain, and planted gardens. In that moment, as light spills over the edge of my bed, I realize something simple yet profound. I am no longer surviving the story. I am writing it. The foundation lives on. 10 years have passed since the day I first opened the doors of Home and Dignity. What began as a single house now spans 7 cities, offering sanctuary to hundreds of women every year. Some come in silence, afraid to speak. Others arrive angry, hearts bruised but eyes defiant. All of them find, in time, what I once thought, lost hope that doesn't expire with age. Dawn, now the executive director, runs the foundation with grace that makes me proud beyond words. Her leadership is calm, thoughtful. Where I once led with fire, she leads with light. Under her, new programs bloom: financial literacy for older women, legal mentorship for survivors, therapy for families learning to rebuild trust. The motto painted in gold across the lobby reads, "Dignity is not given, it is remembered." Each time I see it, my heart tightens. Those words were mine once, born from a lifetime of losing and finding myself. Now they belong to everyone who walks through those doors. Serenity grows wings. Serenity is 16 now, tall, curious, and endlessly brave. She inherited her mother's smile, and I'm told, my stubbornness. She visits me every weekend, still barefoot in the garden, still talking to the violets, as if they were old friends. "Hi, Grandma's flowers," she says every time. "Keep growing." One afternoon, she comes to me with a notebook clutched to her chest. "Grandma, I wrote something for you." Inside are pages filled with her handwriting. Young, earnest, full of heart. The title reads, "The Woman Who Planted Courage." It's a story about an old woman who grew flowers in broken ground, so that others could learn how to bloom again. When I finish reading, I can't speak for a moment. My eyes sting, but the tears don't fall. Instead, I take her hand and say, "You've written the next chapter, Serenity." She smiles. "I want to help run the foundation one day, like Mom, like you." I laugh softly. "You already are, my love. Every word you write plants something new." The Museum of Stories Dawn calls me one morning with a surprise. "Mom, we're creating a museum wing at the main office, the Hall of Resilience. It's going to showcase the stories of women who rebuilt their lives." I chuckle. "That's ambitious." And, she adds with a grin I can hear through the phone, "The first exhibit is yours." When I visit the following month, I see it for the first time. A glass display case holds a few simple objects. The small brass-locked folder where Thomas kept the documents that saved me, my chipped white coffee mug, the letter he wrote, the one that began it all, and, pressed between glass, a violet, perfectly preserved. Above it all, in soft golden script, is a quote, "Not to hurt, but to protect and to teach." Maeve Williams' visitors stand quietly before it. Some cry, some smile. One woman whispers, "That line saved me." And for the first time, I understand what legacy really means. It's not about fame or recognition. It's about the quiet survival of a lesson, passed from hand to hand until it becomes a way of living. A letter from a stranger months later. I receive a handwritten note in the mail. The return address reads, Harris County Correctional Facility. Inside : "Dear Mrs. Williams, I watched your speech on television. I'm serving time for hurting people, the way you described. Your story made me see myself for the first time. I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to be better. Thank you for showing that dignity doesn't have an agenda and redemption doesn't have a deadline." Asterisk. A man trying to change. I read the letter twice, then fold it carefully and place it beside Thomas's. It feels like another full circle one I never expected. The man who once symbolized cruelty in my life was long gone, but his shadow had inspired others to confront their own. Pain, it seems, can ripple into healing when shared truthfully. The goodbye tour at 78, my health began to slow me down. My hands ached. The long speeches grew shorter, the flights fewer. But I wasn't sad. I'd already seen the seeds bloom. So, I spent a year visiting every home in Dignity House one last time. Each visit was like walking into a chapter of a book I'd written with other people's courage. At the first house, a woman named Leela handed me a painting of violets bursting through cracks in the pavement. At the second, an elderly teacher read a poem she'd written after regaining custody of her grandchildren. At the third, a teenage girl whose mother had been rescued from abuse gave me a bracelet made of tiny silver charms, one of them shaped like a door. "Because you opened one for us," she said. Every gift, every smile, was a reminder that love doesn't vanish, it multiplies. The return to the courthouse. Dawn arranged something special for my 80th birthday. When I arrived, confused, I realized where we were. The same courthouse where my story had turned all those years ago. The courtroom looked smaller now, but sitting at the judge's bench was a plaque, "The Hun, David Morales, Memorial Court of Compassion." Dawn led me to the front row. "They're naming this courtroom in your honor, too, Mom." Tears welled up. "Mine," she nodded. "It'll now be called the Williams Morales Court for Family Integrity. You and Judge Morales changed how this state protects its elders. The least they can do is remember you." When the ceremony ended, a young judge approached me, Briley in her 30s. "Mrs. Williams," she said, shaking my hand, "I joined the bench because of you. My grandmother sent me your story when I was in law school. You reminded me that justice isn't paperwork, it's people." I smiled. "Then promise me you'll remember that when it's hardest to I will," she said. And I believed her. The evening garden that night, I sat outside under the stars with Serenity and Dawn. The garden glowed with soft fairy lights, violets blooming in every corner. "Grandma," Serenity asked, "do you think the flowers remember us?" I laughed. "Of course they do. Every time you talk to them, they listen. Every kindness leaves a mark." She thought for a moment, then asked, "Do you think Grandpa Thomas hears us too?" I looked up at the sky, at the endless field of stars, and nodded. "Yes, darling. He's in every light that doesn't go out." The air smelled of rain and blossoms, and for the first time in decades, I felt no weight at all, only gratitude. The final letter when the seasons turned again. I sat at my desk and wrote one last letter. It was addressed to Dawn and Serenity. I sealed it and tucked it into the folder where Thomas's letters still rested. My dearest girls, if you're reading this, I've simply gone where love doesn't need a name anymore. Please don't mourn me. Plant violets, tell stories, teach courage. That's how I want to be remembered. Every bruise I carried turned into a lesson. Every loss became a doorway. Promise me you'll keep walking through yours with heads high and hearts unafraid. The world will still have darkness, but you, my Dawn, my Serenity, will always be its light, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Love always, Mom/Grandma Maeve. Epilogue. Years later, years passed. Seasons shifted. New generations grew up beneath the shade of trees planted by those who once thought they'd never see sunlight again. Home and dignity became a nationwide movement. Hundreds of houses across the country, thousands of lives rebuilt, and in every home, near the front door, a small plaque read, "In memory of Maeve Williams, the woman who taught the world how to bloom again." Serenity, now an adult, stood one morning before that plaque as volunteers hung new curtains. The foundation was hers now. Her daughter named Hope played nearby, clutching a handful of freshly picked violets. She smiled softly and whispered to the air, "Grandma, we're still teaching." A gentle wind stirred, rustling the flowers as if in reply.